Hello, everyone. Before we start, I would like to thank you all for your attendance to today's webinar, What is the Cyber Kill Chain and How to Use It Effectively? I would like to introduce our speakers today, Rangan and Ranjani Venkatraman, CEO and co-CEO of Pinochle.ai, and Pinnacle's Chief Data Scientist, Kaushik Hathi. Without further ado, it is my pleasure to open the floor to our speakers.
Thank you, everyone. This is Rangan here. I'd like to introduce today's topic, which is really going to be about cyber threats that are frequently changing and the defense and prevention tactics across today's landscape is significantly different and it continues to change. As we look at organizations today, we are talking about a very layered approach to security. This encompasses many layers of security, namely human, network, endpoint, perimeter, infrastructure, applications, and the list goes on. Today's advanced safeguards are still not protecting organizations. The purpose of this seminar is to actually review what the cyber kill chain really looks like. And of course, we have a variation of the cyber kill chain, which is augmented by the mightier framework as well. And with our experience working on it, we have adapted it. In short, what we really like to do is review what is it, how does it really work, and what can we do with the Pinnacle platform to actually help security teams prevent and detect cyber attacks. With no further ado, let me just quickly introduce Ranjani Venkatraman, who's the co-CEO. She will at least explain what the cyber kill chain really means.
Hi, everyone. So the question is, what is the cyber kill chain in cybersecurity? Cyber kill chain is nothing but a mental model that's been derived by the military. So the cyber kill chain is nothing but a framework that is broken down into several steps that explains the entire life cycle of a cyber attack. And cyber kill chain also is used to defend against the most sophisticated cyber attacks, which including ransomware, security breaches, and advanced persistent threats.
The original cyber kill chain model essentially had a few steps to it, and they include the reconnaissance, weaponization, delivery, exploitation, installation, command and control, actions on objective, and monetization. There are many pieces that have to come together to make this work. There is an external cyber kill chain, there is an internal one, and there is also how it gets targeted and changed along the way. So how does it actually help when you're looking at the problem statement? The problem statement essentially is, how do we as an organization prevent an advanced persistent threat? How do we prevent an advanced evasion technique from an actor? Today, we are looking at ChatGPT, which is actually capable of creating malicious tools, which in a nutshell can allow a bad actor, even without the lack of knowledge in technology or security, to actually create tools that can actually go against an enterprise. So you're really dealing with lots of linear and non-linear attacks that have sort of emerged, which means that you sort of can pit AI against AI. The cyber kill chain, of course, is not a security system. It's really a mental model that enables a team to anticipate how an attacker will attack and stop them as quickly as possible, or actually intercept if the attack is already transpired. The kill chain specifically here maps out the exact path of a typical attacker so that the team or the software involved can start and recognize a pattern. The kill chain simulates how we can actually gain first-hand experience against a cyber threat, evaluate it from many angles, and ensure that we have processes in place that can actually stop it at the time it begins. A typical process in the kill chain starts with weaponization. The reconnaissance phase is where the attackers begin to identify target and actually make the plan of action. This is where they're researching potential targets, determining vulnerabilities, and exploiting potential entry points. The more information an attacker can actually glean during the space, the more sophisticated and successful the attack can be. The next important phase is actually the weaponization. Here is where an attacker creates the attack vector that can be used on the attack. This includes a malware, a ransomware, a virus, a worm, so on and so forth. During the weaponization phase, the attackers also try to reduce the likelihood of being detected by security solutions. The next real phase is the attacker delivers the attack vector through a phishing email or hacking into the system or through the network. Regardless of the type of the attack they intend to carry out, this stage is actually where the attack goes after the target. The next real important phase here is we can talk about the actual exploitation, where the malicious code is actually executed in the target system. That includes running the script, modifying security certificates, so on and so forth. Installation is where, immediately following the exploitation, the installation allows for the target system to be used through backdoors and front doors, or a combination, to ensure that you have access beyond the normal scope of where you can actually cause damage. Command and control is essentially the phase where we are able to actually successfully avoid detection and create a remote access to where a connection can be made and laterally move through the network. The last but not the least is the action on objective, where the final step is executed and the monetization of the attack happens. This is, in a nutshell, where the processes sort of converge. With respect to the processes that we are really looking at, we tend to combine not only the cyber kill chain approach, but we also combine it with other techniques, including the Mightier framework, along with our own experience to further break down this. Our platform specifically is aimed to prevent and to manage any advanced persistent threat or evasion technique in an enterprise. So this is essentially where the processes begin. We have to ensure that we disrupt the cyber kill chain. For that, we need to be able to detect it and use tools at the reconnaissance layer itself. There are tools that Pinochle has developed that will analyze and understand Active Directory trust relationships, which in turn can be used to escalate privileges and ensure that we understand the kind of breach that is possible. So with these tools, we can detect an indication and ensure that anything that happens on the network is understood. We also will have visibility to the vulnerable parts of the network. This is where we have to start. Once the attackers compromise an endpoint, they don't have to necessarily need administrative or privileged accounts. What they're really going to need is, given the Active Directory usually has a container of all accounts within the system, by default, all users have read permissions to all accounts in the directory. So they typically start there. And there are many processes which we can really talk about. One common strategy is to exploit accounts is pass the hash. Once an attacker takes control of a system, they will harvest all the credentials from the system. In many situations, user accounts are overprivileged and they spread throughout the network, allowing an attacker that has an infected machine to move laterally and infect other systems. There are, of course, other techniques in exploiting authentication protocol vulnerabilities, for example, and those actually are the process where an attacker with network access can brute force passwords for accounts with weak passwords, either directly or through weak points in the network. With that said, I'm actually going to hand it over to Kaushik, who will actually walk through the processes that we actually follow using Deep Detect to help identify an external cyber kill chain process, along with the internal cyber kill chain methods to prevent, stop, and to be able to kill a cyber attack.
So let me start by sharing my screen. To just summarize what Rangan explained about cyber kill chain. So broadly, there are, I'm just trying to correlate this with what a thief or a robber or a burglar would do. in the stage of reconnaissance, they go around the house looking for vulnerabilities in a house if he intends to burglar a house. For example, how many windows are there, whether there is a back door, whether the back door is always closed or not. These are all the kind of things. And then once he or she gets this information, then they will specifically identify where are the entry points and how I can get into this. And then they will actually exploit these entry points. For example, get down the chimney, or break the window glass or window pane and get into the house, and so on and so forth. So there are various kinds of activities, as Rangan was just mentioning. So they're all connected in a way. So if you want to really do the best job possible, then you have to look at all these actions and the data as a connected thing. So this is where our approach makes a difference in looking at these actions and data in a connected fashion. So this is where deep detect comes into picture, wherein we look at all these things in a way which is possible to identify any threats, any breaches very quickly. First of all, why this? To answer that question, see, this approach can basically address three usually common problems. So one of the problems is data abundance. If you have too much data and you want to quickly and precisely do something like a needle in a haystack problem, then it is very difficult. But this approach will let us do that. For example, you have terabytes of data coming from network logs, endpoint detections, so on and so forth. But then how exactly can you get to the problem quickly? So that approach can be addressed with this knowledge graphs. The second is, what often happens is you have too much data coming from various sources, but then they don't speak to each other. Like they are all siloed. So you are usually missing the big picture. So this is another another common problem in this area. So knowledge graphs and deep detect can answer this problem as well, wherein it provides a panoramic picture by connecting all the dots and connecting all this data coming from various sources. And the third, probably the most important, is you can't fix a problem if you don't know what is the problem. So that's usually the major problem in cybersecurity world, because in the cyber kill chain you can definitely stop attack from happening at various stages. But if you don't know where are the gaps in your security apparatus, then you can't go fix them. So that is why identifying blind spots are of paramount importance. And this is where deep detect can also help by pinpointing and identifying and showing us where the problem is. So identifying a problem is the first step in solving it. So that is also something this approach will do.
To add to what Kaushik is saying, it starts with a proper asset management process. The asset management process is extremely important because step one in an advanced persistent threat typically happens to be perimeter exploitation. Exploiting known vulnerabilities in software and hardware. To make this very, very concrete, we are basically looking at an example. For example, Capital One had a scenario where there was an exfiltration that happened. It was really a combination of privileged access that the bad actor had and the combination of a WAF, which is a web application firewall, being misconfigured, where the firewall was supposed to be closed when it actually became open. And it became extremely easy for the bad actor to exploit the vulnerability. Social engineering and phishing are extremely common. That happened in the Uber incident. Malware and downloads are common. Direct hacking using open ports, external access points are absolutely the key things. So how do you dismantle and contain an attack to reduce your blind spots? You identify and remediate vulnerabilities in a timely fashion. You limit access to your crown jewels or sensitive access to your assets. You basically enforce least privilege, because when you actually see the probability of an attack, it typically starts with privileged exploitation, privileged hijacking, and escalation. Here at this stage, you really look at privileged passwords and accounts. And of course, there are other techniques within that. But if you're talking about reducing blind spots, it starts with a great asset management process. It ensures that you have to know your crown jewels. It also means that you have to contain your privileged accesses and limit it. Kaushik, back to you.
Yes, no, I can only think of another analogy wherein we are a house of 4 people, and if all 4 adults have keys, which if one of us miss, it is our responsibility to ensure that we make sure the door lock is changed. If not, that the missing key can be misused by somebody else to break into the house. So it's basically, it comes down to hygiene. House hygiene is similar to the hygiene that has to be maintained for a company as well. So is my analogy making sense to you, Rangan?
And the one thing I will actually add along the lines of what Kaushik just said is the elimination of shared accounts and password sharing, along with the least privilege, as well as monitoring and auditing privileged user session and file activities. I'd like to say that passwords are like inner garments. You don't let anyone see it, and you have to change it very, very often. That's where I would basically start focusing. Back to you, Kaushik.
Yeah, it also again reminds me of hygiene. Yeah, that's right. So I will go into the next slide. So if this is why this slide is basically telling you why our approach, and then the next slide is how our approach. So this is where we want to take it in a slightly different way, like how exactly we are going to address this. So we have lots of data. Generally in this today's world, lack of data is not an issue. It's not usually a problem. The thing is, there is too much data, and you have to figure out what data you need at what point, at what instance. Making sense of this data is actually crucial. Quickly and precisely is also a crucial thing. So we have a data layer which consists of all the common, well-known databases in the cybersecurity world, like CVEs, ExploitDB, MITRE, and so on and so forth. We have our own internal curated databases that we had been developing for some time now. And we also have web crawlers which go and get the latest information about a zero-day vulnerability, zero-day exploit being available or being made aware from reputed resources. It could be news channels, reputed bloggers, and so on and so forth. So this is the data layer. So there's lots of data, but on top of this data, this data has to be provided a context. So this is where annotation layer comes into picture. So annotation can be thought of as made up of 3 things, wherein the first thing is semantic web tech. And semantic web tech can be thought of as a slightly different way, different language of making this data available for computers to understand it quickly. So that is what is semantic web, and the classic example is Google uses semantic web to quickly get data from every web page possible. And if your web page is semantic enabled, it is likely to be identified quicker. And some of the most common semantic websites are BBC websites, and all the Wikipedia web pages have been semantically linked, and so on and so forth. Basically, it enables the computer to read the data very quickly and understand the data quickly within a context. And then we have our own proprietary functions to evaluate and understand what is the risk of a particular vulnerability. For example, just because you have a vulnerability, that doesn't mean you're at high risk. It has to be understood in a bigger context. For example, if I climb up 8 floors, and if you check my BP, obviously it will be very high because I've just climbed 8 floors or few floors. But that if you miss that context, then you might the doctor might say that, oh, I'm a BP patient and I have high BP. So this is where, just because you have a vulnerability, that doesn't mean you are already at a huge risk. So it has to be provided context, and this is where our proprietary function is making a difference and trying to understand and provide a context to a vulnerability to assess that risk. And we heavily use NLP, natural language processing, and which is a particular kind of artificial intelligence to speed up and hasten this process of annotation. So the second layer is all about how do you provide a context to the data? How do you define data in a way computers can make sense of it quickly? And AI and machine learning algorithms can learn from this quickly. So that is the second layer. And yes, Ranga, sorry, you had to say something.
Just to add to Kaushik on this, while the leverage of AI is fairly important and it's very crucial in this particular case, we also unify the kill chain here with other models like I just described. So the goal is to actually defend against end-to-end cyber attacks here for a variety of advanced attacks, and to ensure that we provide insights into the tactics that the hackers employ. And when I talk about AI, we're really talking about not just attacks which typically happen. We incorporate what we call simulated attacks, which basically looks at other types of attacks which are available in the public domain. So case in point, T-Mobile had an attack that was sort of within a 2-year time frame, even after a $400-500 million expense, as an example. Now, the goal is to be able to reverse engineer existing attacks and trying to ensure those are part of the simulation exercises so that there is enough data between quality algorithms and the type of data that we actually feed it to train these algorithms. The goal is to look at many methods that sort of come together to ensure that we are in a position to teach the algorithms patterns that may have emerged from other types of attacks. This includes all the phases that include initial foothold, network propagation, action on objectives. This may actually, in many cases, increase the number of phases that you have seen in the cyber kill chain. In the cyber kill chain, we looked at about 7-8 steps here, but here we are almost 18 to 20 steps that start from the reconnaissance, the weaponization, the delivery. This also includes techniques that are common today: social engineering, exploitation, persistence, defense evasion, which is really advanced evasion techniques. So a lot of that is also taken into consideration. I talked about privileged exploitation as well as escalation. All of that gets incorporated here. Lateral movement, the impact, exfiltration is all accounted for this in training these models. Back to you, Kaushik.
Yes, you basically said the third layer so this is where as Rangan just elaborated on that. So we are using graph algorithms, neural networks, deep neural networks, and pattern matching algorithms to essentially do the things that Rangan was explaining now. So Rangan always says this: the best defense is self-offense. You have to keep trying to fail yourself, and if you fail to fail yourself, it means you have actually won. So that is one of the agendas, one of the methods we follow. So we are just hastening this process, because if we already know that there is an exploit and there is various kinds of vulnerabilities, we try to identify whether there is a path that can be used by a potential hacker and trace this path to your crown jewel and so on and so forth. So we are basically doing the activity of a hacker, but using algorithms and deep neural networks and pattern matching algorithms to speed up the process. So there is a human element as well in this. So for every iteration that we do, there is a human intervention who makes sense of this and see whether this is actually a subject matter expert to see whether this is actually making sense or not. And then that is fed back into the algorithm so that it will learn with every iteration. In this way, we have now created what I called as our gold reference, or a living, breathing knowledge graph. So what I mean by that is, we have a living data point which is all connected to each other. It has a context built into this, and then on top of it, there is also continuous metadata that goes into it. Like as I just mentioned, the knowledge extraction part is also built into this. So it keeps improving with every iteration. So in this way, we have a golden reference of the most known vulnerabilities, all possible risk associated in a given context, and also a potential path a hacker is likely to take for a given domain and a given application, for example. So in this way, all this is built into this, and we keep updating it. So this is our.
Sorry,
Yes.
Kaushik, what I want to say is that this is sort of the chat GPT, of cybersecurity. In other words, if I were to actually say that there are many day one anecdotes to this where we can basically look at fatal vulnerabilities and determine the process here. I'm using ChatGPT because of its popularity as well as its abilities and capabilities that have sort of emerged. In no uncertain terms, our goal is to have that degree of intelligence built in, because human error has to be reduced. And the only way that you can actually do this is use machine speed. For example, for one of our customers, the first day we had this installed, it alerted the enterprise about one domain admin credential that was actually installed in about 40% of its endpoints in the network. Any attacker, in this particular case, even a novice, could have compromised the entire system in one day. The ability to have these kinds of alerts, because you're as strong as your weakest link. In many cases, these instances can be avoided by designing a security posture that factors into account each phase of the potential attack. That's really at the heart of this design.
Absolutely. So this actually comes back to the way we started. Wherein you can't fix something if you don't know what to fix. It could be car, your house, or cybersecurity. So this is where being aware of a problem is the first step in solving it. So this is where these kind of approaches can quickly make you aware what to go and fix and what to prioritize. So in this way, we have this deep detect knowledge graph built in. And we use this as the reference. As Rangan was telling, I will come to the way we actually deployed it. We have deploying it for some of our clients. So generally what happens in this area, in the cybersecurity world, is there are 7 layers of cybersecurity. There is human layer, perimeter, so on and so forth, as it's there in the presentation. So most often than not, already organizations are aware of the risk associated with the hack. So they will most likely be using some product or the other. There might be some products which are very good at endpoint detection. There might be some coverage over network and application security, and so on, or even for databases and so on and so forth. The thing is, you can now say that all these coverages probably are doing their best possible thing, but they might not be necessarily speaking to each other. So this is where the data is actually siloed. Even though even if the company has all possible security layers covered from various products, they might not necessarily be speaking to each other. So but for a hacker, or a potential hacker, they don't care what you use. As long as there is a vulnerability, as long as there is a possibility of exploitation, it can be exploited. So this is where we want to make a difference. And how we make a difference here is by identifying not only the vulnerabilities, which probably it's also available from various sources, but then providing it a context and ensuring what is the path somebody, some potential hacker is likely to take in successfully delivering this cyber kill chain. What is the cyber kill chain that a potential hacker is likely to take, and what is the path? And if you ensure that the path is first taken care, then you drastically reduce the risk associated with the cybersecurity posture of your organization. So this is this way we are doing a bunch of things. It can provide a lot of things. I will let Rangan speak about the threat intelligence and attack prediction and so on and so forth.
One of the areas related to this, for example, across the layers of security. See, today, if you really look at how cybersecurity is designed and optimized for a particular layer. You have solutions or products that optimize the layer, for example, the human layer or the network layer, or say, for example, the perimeter layer. But there aren't very many solutions today that take a more holistic approach across layers, because an advanced persistent threat typically does not happen within one layer of security. It traverses through many layers of security. And for example, when you have this installed, you automatically receive insights into vulnerable areas of your network. For example, it can also give you weak and exposed passwords to stealth admins and unpatched operating systems. So all of this allows you to sort of see it across different patterns, because your ability to see this cannot be guaranteed when you're just looking at one layer. Case in point, there's always been a network operating center that focuses on the network side of it. However, in this particular thing, you sort of limit the ability to see this from a holistic part. The sum of the parts tend to be much, much greater than the individual parts. And the optimization traditionally has been across the individual parts, while the weaknesses and the optimization or the exploitation happens at the sum of the parts. This is really where our platform is designed to give you intellect, capability, and insight, which sort of becomes the convergence of the layers.
Absolutely. So I just want to add. So sometimes what happens is, generally in organizations, people they of course concentrate on the risk, on the vulnerabilities associated with the various layers. But one other way of looking at this is, you can look at the data in several ways. So for example, depending on if this were to be a 3D object, depending on how you take a shadow of it, you get slightly different perspectives. So for example, if it is a perfect cube, then if you take in one projection, you get a square irrespective of what axis you take. But if it is a rectangle, you take different shapes of rectangles, so on and so forth. So if you take all this data and do various projections, you can understand what is the business context of these vulnerabilities, who are at high risk, what does it translate to with respect to business value being or business disruption that might be happening. So even in an organization, and for a business leader who need not necessarily be a cybersecurity expert, they can quickly understand the values that this person might be looking at. For example, if it is CFO or CEO, then they might primarily be interested in what happens if there is a disruption and what is the value loss. So that can be understood from this as well. So if it is if it's IT security manager, probably he or she is primarily interested in where are my weakest links, how to go about fixing it. So then that can be addressed as well. So for example, just one case is, even if there is no vulnerability as such, for example, we can say that for the fact that this person has super admin access for a particular database, then he already is at a higher risk of being tricked into phishing activity and so on and so forth. So if there are some super admins in the organization or very prominent very important people with administrative rights, probably their emails should not be available first and foremost in public domains. And if it is available, even if it is not of a huge risk, it can be a risk because it can be potentially used for phishing attacks. So like this, for depending on the domain, whether it is a fintech, it's a healthcare industry, whether it is a manufacturing, IIoT, depending on the context, you can basically get all the data from all these siloed solutions or products that may be there and provide a context to this quickly. And then, because we have this built in, we can quickly look at our comparative analysis, do a comparative analysis to do the following things like attack prediction, attack tracing, and so on and so forth. We can also, worst case scenario, even if there were to be a breach, we can quickly take action on this, wherein we will be able to help this in the forensic analysis, as well as have a business continuity plan in place, wherein even if you have if your company is affected in whatever way, you quickly get up and run from a bad fall. So in all these ways, this approach can be extremely helpful. Rangan, please add on.
To summarize this and to conclude this webinar, for a deep eye, essentially does this for you. It allows you to prevent lateral movement and unauthorized domain access due to misuse of network credentials via any sort of reconnaissance tools. Second, it allows you to block and contain any malicious attacking tools, including PowerShells. It allows you to deeply inspect authentication protocols, LDAP to control protocol usage. Last but not the least, it reduces the risk of credential forwarding, password cracking, and other credential-based attacks, such as pass the hash, golden tickets, so on and so forth. We wanted to just thank you all for attending. I will let Ritanya just draw the conclusion here, and we look forward to engaging with you in the very near future. Ritanya, over to you.
Thank you very much. Although extremely vulnerable, the cyber kill chain is just a framework. It's important for organizations to have the right cybersecurity software in place to carry out necessary prevention and detection capabilities. For example, extended detection and resilience, XDR, as it stands for, tools are becoming increasingly important for the success of the modern cybersecurity strategies. With Pinochle, organizations can prevent, detect, and intercept both known and unknown threats before they do damage. By unifying and extending detection and response capabilities across multiple layers of security, users receive industry-leading protection in every area, all in a single platform. Organizations no longer need to rely solely on outdated approach that examines cyber attacks after the fact. Instead, they can go ahead of the threats with confidence. Discover how Pinochle is disrupting the cyber kill chain and book a demo today. Thank you very much.
Now over to Q&A.
Yeah, at this time, we'd just like to open the floor for any questions from the participants.
I had a question. So I was kind of watching the kill chain and how everything kind of flowed, and I was curious, is there a way as things are happening to sort of have a bit of a war room and understand how to react in the moment? I understand a lot of this work is done proactively, but when an attack is actually happening, I'm curious how these tools adapt to support the needs of a business to protect itself. By the way, Grant Ecker with Danaher, really pleased to be with you guys today.
Thank you, Grant.
Absolutely, yes. Yes is the answer, Grant. Thank you for the question, by the way. So I can give you a scenario where it already works. For example, so let us say a particular, as I said, we have already deployed this, and it is already working for some of our clients who uses this technology. So let us say we have a scenario where somebody is always logging in from, say, Florida in the US. And suddenly this person now logs in from Chicago. And if it is suspicious, for example, 1 minute he has logged in from Florida, the very next second he has logged in from Chicago, obviously it is a suspicious activity. So automatically this will detect this as a suspicious activity and block the user. So in discussion with the, this is one scenario where, we have already discussed this. With discussing with the client, yeah, we can.
To focus on the detection, Kaushik, one thing I'm going to add to it, you can also, I think the first part is whether to determine an intruder is present. That's the first part that gets answered, Grant, to what Kaushik was saying. This allows us to, do the second thing, which is actually deny it, which essentially means that you prevent any unauthorized access. The third is to stop and change the traffic of the attacker. And then, of course, we want to basically, counterattack any command and control, events. So the timely detection, in fact, the mean time to detect is really where we focus on. This allows us to, in real time, deny, disrupt, then go, to sort of counterattack or degrade the attack, especially on the command and control layer. Because if you have FTP ports or those layers open, you have an exfiltration, deceive the attacker in an advanced persistent threat, which means that you sort of interfere with command and control. And then you essentially contain it through network segmentation changes. So this is the normal process that we actually follow. The minute we detect, we focus on command and control to make sure we are controlling the traffic. So hopefully we answered the question.
Yeah, that was perfect. Thank you.
Thank you, Grant.
And it looks like we have a question from William.
Yeah, okay. This is Dr. Zaid, Mr. Fielding's technical consultant. And I'm here asking just a brief question. Thank you for the moment. And this is about audit trail and collection and archive of transactional information during and after a assumed attack or encroachment on a system for the use later with law enforcement, intelligence support, or other things as a technical tool, to launch from. In that regard, if there's been an illegal attack or an encroachment that's violating some of the domestic or international laws, how robust is the audit trail mechanism and the feedback after the fact, from your side in such a scenario? Hypothetical as it is, it's quite an important question to us anyway, because Phoenix intelligence support primarily is, a support organization for from the private sector for law enforcement and intelligence and counterintelligence. So in this particular case, that's the question. Thank you.
Thank you for that question. And actually, it's an important question to probe. We normally have a process where, a minute we either see or suspect an attack, we create, basically we focus on the kill chain and really focus, like we described. We have extended the kill chain to about 18 different parameters. And then we figure out, in which part of these parameters we are able to see the trail. And, that pretty much goes all the way from the reconnaissance layer, all the way to intrusion, establishing the backdoor in the network, whether they obtained user credentials, whether they installed any utilities, whether there was a use of privileged escalation, how they maintain persistence. All of that gets mapped. And we do this through a constant process of what we call self-attack, self-check, and self-heal. So the normal challenge in any SOC operation is that it's very analogous to a security guard, sitting in an airport who just waits for something to happen and probably spends his entire life without ever using a gun or ever being in a scenario. But the only way you can really get good at this is to actually have this process that we normally follow, where you're simulating attacks on a very, very regular basis. And this allows us to actually incorporate the chain extremely well. So the way we test our blue and red teams are, there will be a red team activity, which the blue team typically is not expected to know. And in this process, the blue team really doesn't know whether it's a simulated attack or if it is a real attack. And and then they have to go through the process of identifying it. So we, the process, it allows us to maintain a really good trail, because it becomes part of your playbook, and you keep working on that playbook on a very regular basis. And that's the one technique that has really worked, for us to be able to keep that trail. And then, of course, we verify if it's simulated or if it's real.
Thank you very much. That's quite helpful.
Thank you.
And looks like we have a question from Gerald. What would be the best last line of defense?
The best last line of defense comes down to how many layers of LODs you have. We generally recommend at least 3 lines of defense. And if you're able to at least get 3 lines of defense, you typically do extremely well. In my opinion, the last line of defense is to control your command and control ports, as well as ensuring that any exfiltration possibilities are limited, which means that you have to manage your network traffic in a way that if there is any abnormal traffic flows. And of course, making sure that any remote connections, are held. And this is where I think zero trust, methodology really helps, because you actually can prevent that scenario. So within that, of course, is keeping it to least privileges. That will be the last line of defense. So minimum 3 LODs.
I just want to answer another question which was not asked, what is the first line of defense? So obviously you have answered the last line of defense. So I see. I was reading a report from IC3, which is a organization in the US which keeps track of all possible cyber attacks. So according to them, 70% of all cyber attacks are primarily because of social engineering. So somebody acting as though they are, a genuine customer or a genuine website or, friend or colleague or IT head or whoever. So it all comes down to basically social engineering, and the best possible way of uh, protecting your oneself from social engineering is becoming aware. So probably raising our own awareness is probably paramount, and that first line of defense will save everything else in the follow-up. At least the first bridge has to be strong enough. Now, even if the internal network might be the best possible thing, but if the social engineering is not, the awareness is not generated, probably that will lead to other possible cascading problems. The entry point for the cyber kill chain.
Happened with
Yeah.
Uber, right? The
Absolutely.
incident,
Yeah, I was about to.
a technology company, and the reason I'm bringing up Uber is because it's an actually technology company. They're not a manufacturing company or whatnot. And it was very simple. I mean, it was just a spear phishing, campaign, and then they had access to all the front and the back doors very, very fast. T-Mobile is a great example, where there was just an exposed router that became the entry point for the hacker. Examples are a lot, but in most cases, if you look at it, it's actually something really small and silly. It is usually not the doors that we think. I think the organizations do really well in locking the big doors, but they fail in the smaller ones. And I think we can also draw an analogy from a home security where you put those sensors in the key doors, but there are many windows in the house that usually are left high and dry for an entry. So that's, in a nutshell, how we approach it. Thanks for the question.
All right. I think we're out of time for today's webinar. So once again, I would thank everybody for joining today. And for more information on our products and services, please do visit our website, pinnacle.ai, and follow us on LinkedIn for details on upcoming webinars. So once again, I do thank everyone for your attendance today.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.